In the words of Nelson Mandela, there's no easy walk to freedom anywhere. This quote resonates deeply with the years of activism and advocacy that led to the passage of Ghana's Affirmative Action and Gender Equity Law in July 2024. Today, we reflect on the journey to this victory, the key voices that championed the cause, and the doors that it opens for Ghanaian women. Hi, welcome to another episode of the Gender Watch podcast. I'm Regina Boliboti, and joining me for this conversation is a senior lawyer, development consultant, and human rights activist. She holds a law degree from the University of Ghana, Legon, and was called to the Ghanaian bar in 1989. She also holds a master's in law from the Georgetown University Law Center, Washington, D.C., and is the managing consultant of the ALC Law Consult. She's also the convener of the Affirmative Action Coalition. Welcome to our podcast, Madam Sheila Menka Premo. I must say I'm honored to have you here. And reading that you were called to the Ghanaian bar in 1989 and looking evergreen, how do you do it?
Well, I believe that if it's all first of all by God's grace,
Okay.
I would say. And then I think that if you do work that you like doing, you do it with pleasure. So I guess your stress level is more reduced.
Oh, okay. So that's the clue,
yes, Yes. You should. It's good to identify things that you like doing. Yes.
And you've been one of the foremost voices as far as affirmative action is concerned in Ghana. And I remember on the 30th of July when the speaker announced that the bill has now been passed. I called Dr. Rose Mensah-Kotton of Abantu for Development. I asked her, how do you feel? She said, I heaved a great sigh of relief. And I know the amount of work you have done as far as this is concerned. And I'm going to ask you the same question. You probably were in Parliament that day, were you?
I was in Parliament on that day.
Okay.
Yes.
So at that point where the Speaker of Parliament said the Affirmative Action and Gender Equity Bill has now been passed, what was your first reaction?
I was so excited, very excited. I expected that was going to happen.
Okay.
But when it actually did happen, I was so happy and so very exhilarated, I would say. And the speaker actually commended us for our persistence in getting us here. Very, very happy day for me, I must say.
Okay. And you've spoken about persistence. Run us through this bill or this law's journey from inception to when it went to Parliament, to Cabinet, Parliament, all these years. Help us understand how painstaking this journey has been.
So it's been a long journey, and I would say that, a lot of other people have been involved in it. I came to be working on affirmative action because I belong to a group of women, a women lawyer group called Leadership and Advocacy for Women in Africa, or LAWA Ghana alumni, which is an alumni group from where I did my master's program from, which was a fellowship program. So our key area of interest is in identifying areas where there's either inadequate policy or none at all. And then we would normally do what we call legislative advocacy. We do research, sometimes using some students, and then we make proposals. So in the 1990s, one of the issues we worked on was affirmative action for Ghana. And we tried to push it. It didn't really go very far. Other people were also doing a lot of initiatives. Then in 2011, the Ministry of Women and Children Affairs decided to convene a meeting of a group of people who were working in this area. It was a multi-sectorial group. Some were NGOs, some were from various ministries, departments, and agencies, some from academia, and then representation from a number of political parties, So to convene this meeting and said, Ghana had an obligation under a number of international human rights instruments to come up with an affirmative action law, but she wanted to know whether it was time to have something like that done. So it was like some kind of a technical group. So what we did was to do like secondary research, see what was out there, what the other people have done or written about it with regard to Ghana. Then we went on the ground. They divided us into groups, I think, so I went to a number of regions. I went to Ashanti region. I went to Dodowa. We did a few other places where we did town hall meetings with a cross section of people to find out what their views are on this issue and what they recommend. So at the end of the day, the three of us were asked to summarize the findings. Myself, a lady called Hilary Bedema, and another lady called Joanna Opare. So put it together, and basically it was calling for an affirmative action law to be enacted for Ghana. So based on that summary, they got a legislative drafter to draft the very first bill. I think the very first draft came out in 2013.
Okay.
And then there was a lot of consultation to see, what people thought, etc., etc. Lots of consultations went on in between. There were changes in the minister responsible. So in 2016, the then minister, really worked hard at fine-tuning that particular bill. It was called Affirmative Action, in brackets, Gender Equality Bill. So she also called the members of the technical committee. We helped with also doing some work even at the cabinet subcommittee level to help defend the proposals. So it received approval, and it actually went to Parliament in October 2016. But it was close to election. It was election in December, so it didn't really go far, and it lapsed. Then there was a changeover in government in 2017, and the then minister responsible for gender and social protection, when she came, one of the first things she took up was this particular bill.
Okay.
In April 2017, I remember she did a stakeholder meeting using the 2016 bill to what people thought of it, and what are some of the shortcomings, etc. Because she also wanted to own it. So we were there also as technical persons, myself and a few, and Hilary and Joanna were sort of resource persons, took people through what the history was and the content and like a little critique. So following that, a new version came up in 2017. It would go to cabinet, they would come with comments, this one should be taken out, this should be taken out, fine-tune, etc. And now I just remember in 2018, the feedback from cabinet was the law was too long, it should be shortened, and then the cabinet wanted a communication plan, an implementation plan to go along with it. So we were camped for about 5 days somewhere around the Pedwasi area, a hotel called Heziba. Also worked at fine-tuning it and tightening things up, etc. And then I think there was also another changeover of the ministers. So things kind of slowed down a bit. The last draft we worked on was the 2020 version.
Okay.
And it's like I said, it's a long story. But around that time, we realized that we're not calling the technical committee as much as they should, and things were slow. So I sort of consulted a few others and said, look, on the outside, if the ministry is not calling us to come help with the bill, let's also form a coalition and push for this law. So this coalition was launched in September 2019. I guess because I initiated the idea, I was a convener. And we have also been working at also pushing, So in 2020, there was also election in that year.
Yes.
In 2021, between 2021 and late 2022, not much. The minister who was responsible for gender, who owns this bill, was not available. So not much happened, but we continued our advocacy, pushing. We wanted this law to be passed, etc. In December 2022, a new minister came in. And when she came in, she saw this bill as a very important bill. So in March 2023, she took it to cabinet again for their consideration. And I think in cabinet, one of the issues that came up was that a bill of this nature had to be based on a certain policy. And the gender policy we had then was from 2015 and expired in 2020. So there wasn't any gender policy.
Okay.
So some development partners came on board, UNFPA came on board. I happened to be one of the team of consultants who quickly put together a new gender policy from Ghana from 2023. We decided that to be a longer one to 2032, a 10-year one was also sent to cabinet, etc. So I believe that it was one of the things which also helped. So around October 2023, the bill was laid in Parliament. It was initially laid under a certificate of urgency, meaning that it was going to go very fast, but we're told that the committee that it was referred to, which is the Gender and Children Committee decided that, look, the nature of this bill was such that it couldn't go under a certificate of urgency. Usually, when a bill is being considered under a certificate of urgency, they wouldn't invite stakeholders from outside to come and speak to it.
Okay.
So they said we should go through the normal lines. They invited stakeholders to submit memo. So the coalition, among others, also submitted a memo. In February 2024, they called us to sit with the committee, as they usually would do, to do a clause-by-clause review. And then whatever comments we had, you would argue about it, and then we would accept whatever. After that, the committee realized that the next step was for them to have prepared a report and sent it together with the bill back to Parliament for the next stage, which would be the second reading. But they thought that the corrections, the areas that needed to be corrected were a lot. So what they did was to submit the bill to the Attorney General's office, which is like a technical group, together with the corrections that we had all come up with. It's not only the coalition, a few other NGOs were also there.
Okay.
That they should update the bill. So basically what they did was to withdraw. So withdrew the bill which had been laid, and they said it should be updated, because if they hadn't done that, it would have taken, if it had gone to the House in the stage in which it was in, the debate would have been longer and most likely would not have passed.
Okay.
So it took a while for them to correct it. In the in-between, there was a changeover of minister again. The new minister who came also took this up. So by the time she came, I think around May, June, she took this issue up, and was very cooperative, working with us. And the bill was laid again for the third time on the 14th of June. And this time, it was also referred back to the same Gender and Child Committee, but because they had heard stakeholders already and done all the updating, they didn't do much. They prepared their reports. I wouldn't say they didn't do much. They did their work quickly and prepared their reports. And then the bill was relayed back in Parliament for the third time on the 21st of June. And then the process started. It was, they were supposed to be getting ready for the next stage. Normally once it's laid, so the first reading was on the 14th of June. Second reading, as I said, was on the 21st of June, when the report was ready together. That one, just discussed the policy consideration and decided that I should go to the next level. The next level is a consideration stage. So the minister decided that, look, she didn't want a long debate on it. At the consideration stage, the whole House, the 276 members would debate it clause by clause and vote. They also realized that they may also, there's some parts of the bill which may still, lead to long drawn out debate. So she decided to do something they call a winnowing, where she would get a small group of parliamentarians from both sides of the House, and then they would sit together with her and her experts. She called on us to also help with that. Go through, and then they will look at the bill, knowing what each side's views on the bill is. Then parts that needed to be changed would be, they would agree on it, etc., etc. So the winnowing took almost like a week or two to be done before it went fully for the consideration. By that time, the key areas of concern, they had agreed on it already. So the consideration stage didn't take very long.
Yeah, but I was monitoring the debate on it, the consideration stage. There were still some very forceful comments from MPs, and you'd agree that this, controversial as it may sound. So I did hear some very few. And in fact, I think, was that why the bill now had to become affirmative action and gender equity?
So so basically, at the winnowing stage, you just kind of agree in principle on the areas of changes. So some of those issues had already been agreed on winnowing. One of the first things during the winnowing was they raised the issue about the title of the bill. They said the word equality, they didn't think it was appropriate because the end game is equality, but the journey the bill will walk is equity. If you look at the bill, it doesn't from the word go just say 50%, right? And the bill is based on a constitutional provision. One of the provisions of the Constitution where the bill relies on a lot is Article 17 of the Constitution. Basically, clauses 17, 1 to 3 says there should be no discrimination on the basis of gender, among others, and gender and other considerations. But then 17.4 says that where historically it's been found that one gender has been discriminated against on the basis of gender, there is nothing wrong for Parliament to pass a law to write the balance. So the word balance that is there meant that it had to be a gradual process. It couldn't be sudden.
Okay.
So and if you look at the text of the law says, from the onset, once it comes into power, once it comes into being, the first 2 years, it will try to achieve 30% balance. Then the next 2 years, 35%. Then by the year 2030, which is the year that UN Sustainable Development Goals Goal 5 says countries should have reached parity, then it will get there. So they said it will not be appropriate to continue using the name equality, because it's not, from the onset, it will not be equality. It will be equity if it's 30%, etc. Okay. And it was very, in a way, so we talked about it a bit, but we had to concede that point. And then the minister went with that understanding that they would accept the change of name from Affirmative Action Gender Equality Bill to Affirmative Action Gender Equity Bill. For us, we thought that it's the same journey we are going to work on to get there.
So it was a little sacrifice for big impact.
It had been discussed already. We had agreed in principle on it. So yes, it was one of those things.
I'm glad you've mentioned the controversy surrounding equity, equality, and the explanation you're giving me now makes me understand why certain provisions are in the bill as we see them. But then once it was passed, the criticism, one of the foremost criticism, was that the fact that it doesn't contain an outright provision about quota was a big disservice. And I think I remember hearing one local governance expert say that Parliament didn't do well by eliminating or not including quota systems. It gives the political parties the leeway to do anything they want. Help us understand why, there were no quotas, and whether there were any constitutional limitations to that.
Yes. So the law, as it is structured, the first schedule to the law has a schedule, which I've described, which is in the first 3 years. In the first 2 years, we try to get 30% balance. There's research which shows that women are way down there. If you look at Parliament, out of our 276 member Parliament, only 40 are women, making it 14.5. So it's very low. So it says the first 2 years, all sectors, public sector, ministerial, executive, legislature, judiciary, as well as the private sector would try to achieve 30% sort of representation, then 35, and then so the indicators are there. But then in the text of the law, during the winnowing, and then also at the consultation stage, one of the issues that came up in the bill itself, one of the weakest parts of the bill was with the representation in Parliament, political parties section. And it encourages them to comply with the indicators. Okay,
not compels them,
because one of the arguments that was raised, which you couldn't find any counter to, because we were pushing, can't we strengthen that provision and put quotas there so that we can quickly run? They referred us back to the same constitution. Articles 93, 94 of the constitution indicates who qualifies to go to Parliament.
Okay.
Indicates the age, indicates which constituency, residents in the constituency. It indicates the tax, all the constitutions. There is nothing there in 93 and 94 about gender inclusion. Do you understand? So it was made very clear that unless there's a constitutional review to require sort of gender, some kind of a quota system in there, and ensuring that there's, as much as possible, there's some equitable representation of both genders. If you can't have an act of parliament have a provision which will override the constitution.
Okay.
The acts of parliament are supposed to draw their strength from the constitution. If you try to do that, they'll tell you, somebody can easily go to the Supreme Court to say that it is unconstitutional. Do you understand? So that is why if you review the law, if it wants to be out very soon, you realize that the language used is softer. It encourages them in their manifestos to ensure that, first of all, in their political party setup itself, when it comes to leadership, there's as much representation of both genders. When it comes to getting, primary level, encouraging women, etc., that was what could be done.
Okay.
If you had put in a quota straight, somebody would have gone to court to say that it's unconstitutional because the provisions in the constitution would not support it. So one of the things we are pushing for, there's an initiative now to review the constitution. 2 weeks ago there was a workshop somewhere in Abokobi where they looked at the proposals. So one of the things we're pushing for was to ensure that those clauses of the Constitution are amended to ensure that there's room for gender. In some countries they have it 30%, like Rwanda and the rest. It's in their constitution. In South Africa, it's in their constitution. In Kenya, it's in their constitution, because you cannot have an act of parliament come up with that, something which the constitution, doesn't. That is it. So that's the problem. It's one of the weakest parts of the law, but the law is still important, because when it comes to the executive arm of government, they do a lot of appointment of ministers, appointment of heads of institutions in which government has a stake in. They would have to comply immediately. Council of States currently, I know there's some kind of election that is done, but there's some also appointed. Everywhere else. Then when it comes to judiciary, that balance issue can be applied. It is only when it comes to representation in Parliament that is going to be a bit problematic, and a lot more needs to be done on the Constitution to pave way for us to get there.
Well, as we wait for the final text, because you've been very instrumental in the entire process, are you able to share with us some key elements of this law that we have now?
Okay. As I indicated from the beginning, this law sets up a system where we will progressively achieve gender equity and then eventually gender equality when it comes to representation in key decision-making positions, both the public as well as the private spheres in Ghana. And so it addresses that in many, many ways. It sets up a gender equity committee which will be responsible for monitoring progress. I've indicated that the progressive way, the progressive manner in which we would achieve the objective has some indicators in the first schedule by which we would achieve it from 30 to 35, eventually to 50% parity by the year 2030. Okay, so this to enable the various sectors to be tracked, the gender equity committee would have to come up with some kind of a baseline study. So we'll have from the onset information on where each sector is at commencement. Some sectors are doing well, some like education. I understand that this, even at the primary level, is almost at par. Even at the high school or secondary level, I hear that now a lot of girls have gotten the right to go to school, so it's also almost at par. Tertiary, it may be a bit different. So the law mentions the public sector, it mentions the executive arm, the legislative arm of government, the judicial arm. Each of them, the monitoring will be done by, for instance, the public service will be done by the Public Services Commission. The judicial part, the Judicial Council is responsible for them, so they will do what they can. But overall, they are all supposed to be reporting yearly to the Gender Equity Committee. And if a particular sector is complying, they'll be issued with a certificate of compliance. Okay. And when it comes to the private sector, there are also sections on the private sector, and they're also supposed to ensure that they have what they call gender policies, where they would make sure that they have provisions on what the steps to be taking to ensure that there's equity and equality within their workplaces, address issues that can sometimes hinder women in advancing within the workplaces. And there are some incentives for the private sector if they comply. The incentives for the private sector is if they comply, then they can get tax rebates within a certain period. Then they also get the right to apply for government contracts. So the idea is that once the law starts working, when it comes to people applying for government contracts, one of the criteria will be looking at whether you are complying with this, gender compliance together with this, in accordance with this law. There would be what they call, when it comes to budgeting, the expectation is that each of the sectors to the public sectors would have what they call gender budgeting, so that you consciously have to ensure that in their budgeting, they look at the needs of both men and women, and it's in there. The law also has about a number of schedules. It has about 7 schedules, I think. The first one is the indicators, which I mentioned. The second one is the various international human rights instruments Ghana has signed and ratified, and then the other ones relate to strategies that can be adopted by various sectors to ensure that they're able to achieve the agenda, this thing that I mentioned. I think I mentioned the political party part, where they are supposed to be encouraged, etc. There are some strategies there where they're supposed to ensure that women are given opportunities, women are given training, women who have tried to stand some kind of there's feedback from them as to what their experiences are. Then there's also some punishment parts. There's a part to do. Yes, if you subject somebody to gender sort of attacks. Sometimes people try to stand for positions, etc., and then they are vilified because you're a woman, because of our culture, this thing. There's an offense, and there's a punishment. Yes, there's a punishment of 500 penalty units, and I think between 6 to 1 year imprisonment. There are punishments there for certain acts.
What doors will this affirmative action and gender equity law open for myself? As a young Ghanaian woman,
yes, it would open a lot of doors for the younger generation, people like you, who will be looking for jobs and opportunities. You have to know the law and to make your demands, because once the law is supposed to be kicking in from now, the quota, which is set out in that indicators that I'm mentioning, the numbers are there for people to comply. So yes, you have to be able to push and make a demand, to insist. And discrimination on the basis of gender when it comes to employment or people being suffering all kinds of things at the workplace, this is supposed to be a thing of the past. So with regards to the enforcement mechanisms, the National Labour Commission has a role to play when it comes to employment, both in the private sector. You can lodge complaints there. We can also lodge complaints with STRAD because it's also human rights abuse. If someone is suffering discrimination, and not being given the opportunity to gain a position that they would like. And then the judicial service, the High Court also is ultimately responsible for enforcement. There's a labor division of the High Court. People who are not happy with outcomes for complaints. People can also report directly to the Gender Equity Committee, which can then also refer for matters to be handled.
So as we speak, the committee is in place?
Not yet. The committee has not been set up. So the Affirmative Action Coalition bill, our initial mandate was to push to have the bill set up. We are in the process of modifying our mandate a little to broaden up. So it's soon going to be known as the Affirmative Action Affirmative Action Law Coalition. We'll change ourselves from bill to law because we want to help with implementation. So that hasn't been set up yet. I believe the Honorable Minister will be waiting for the law to come out. There's a number there. Based on that, they would then write to the respective ministries. The GEC is supposed to be made up of a lot of institutional representation. Ministry of Attorney General's Office, Ministry of Local Government, and many government bodies, and then a few from, I think, Labour would come in. Then they can appoint, I think NDPC also will appoint somebody with sort of monitoring and evaluation experience. Then the minister has to appoint a gender expert to help. So if there are a few technical people, but a lot of institutional representation would be represented. Then, and then they will do the work. It has not been yet set up yet.
So we're wrapping up. 2 questions before we end this conversation. A lot of misconceptions about what the law is set out for. And I've heard people question why we even need such a law. For those who have these misconceptions, what's your message to them?
My message is that Ghana needs this law. And there's a lot of justification to have this law in place. First of all, women form more than 50% of this population. But when it comes to decision-making positions, the reality, even in the absence of empirical studies, some people have done empirical studies, it's very clear that women are not in key decision-making positions. And this is not helping our country. Okay? Again, Ghana has an obligation under various international human rights instruments, including the UN Conventions, UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Sustainable Development Goals, which calls for parity. The calls for inclusion of women also in leadership. Okay. Also at the AU level, there is the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. There's a protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the rights of women. It's called the Maputo Protocol 203. It also makes it clear that women need to be given opportunity in leadership, parliament, etc., etc. Okay. Then there's also research which shows that it makes economic sense to ensure inclusivity. Okay. It takes both men and women to run a home. Also takes men and women to also run a nation.
Okay.
Things that women think of, men may not think about it. When the two come together, then the nation would go well, to be run well. And then, fifthly, this is the route many countries have used. Because of cultural stereotypes, etc., etc., there are many countries where for a long time women were down. All those who were able to increase the numbers of women did it through legislation. I won't even go to the Western world. I would go to our own Africa. Rwanda, they've done it. Kenya, South Africa, Senegal has done it, Guinea, etc. Which is legislation, because we have a few policies, but policies, governments can comply with the policy or not comply. But if it's a law and they're not complying, then you can take them up on it. So there's enough justification to have this law. The other fear people also have, which we've heard, is to lead to reverse discrimination, that we're going to discriminate against the other gender. No. Currently, the other gender is up. We've endured it. This law will ensure that the other gender is also given an opportunity. The way our law is, Article 17.4, which I mentioned, it indicates clearly that it's to address an imbalance. So the way our law is structured, that's why the indicators are there in the first schedule. Once you reach the balance in a particular sector, that program has to stop. It says that Parliament is supposed to pass a law which will bring in policies and programs to address the imbalance. So our understanding is that our law will not be one of those where once we reach parity, it will still continue on for the women to overtake the men. No. Once you reach parity, that particular program for that particular sector will stop. That is why the GEC, Gender Equity Committee, will be there. They'll be measuring. And so people shouldn't have any fear. It will rather enable women who are doing very well, qualified and doing very well in certain sectors, to be in key decision-making positions, and we all benefit from that.
Okay, so let's wrap up, and I think this is a difficult question for you because it's a tall list. But of course, I'm going to ask you to celebrate some of the key voices that have championed this cause up to this point. To celebrate some of them, and I'm thinking that the Speaker of Parliament, Alban Bagbin, will be included in this list because I heard him during the consideration. He said that my priority is Affirmative Action Bill. Any other thing, no. I want this bill to be passed before Parliament rises. And surely he did that.
Yes, thank you very much. I think the Speaker did a very good, he lived up to his promise. And he really did a lot to get the bill to be passed. But I also mentioned the previous Speaker, Honorable Michael Quay. He had also made this a priority, but somehow he didn't get the opportunity. But I would also commend him. But I would commend this current Speaker and the Business Committee of Parliaments, which really helped to get this done. I'd also commend the Honorable Dakwa Newman. She's a current minister. Yes, she did a lot to really give the last push for the law to be passed. But I'll commend her predecessor ministers. Some of them did outstandingly well. You remember I said in 2011 a committee was set up. It was set up by Honorable Juliana Mensah. I must commend her a lot. I must also commend Honorable Nanoye Leta. It was during her time in 2016 that the bill first went to Parliament. I must commend all the others, Honorable Otiko, and I can't mention them all, but they've all done very well, including the one who Honorable Newman succeeded. I would also commend the committees, the Gender and Children Committee, the chairs. The previous chair was Honorable Patricia Apieje. She did a lot. Remember I mentioned that in February, she realized that there was a lot of corrections to the bill, needed to go back to AG's office to work on it, etc. I must commend her a lot. And then her successor, the current chair, is Honorable Helen Intoso. She also took it as a priority and has worked. So for me, this is one role where they've worked across parties, I would say. to get us where we are. So I must commend all those, as well as all those behind who have done a lot of research.
The likes
Mrs.
of you.
Elizabeth Palu, yes, did research in the 1990s to find out where we are. Rose Mensah Kutin, Honorable Rose Mensah Kutin, remember Women's Manifesto in 2004, they made it as one of the key areas that everybody should be advocating for, and so many others. So many, I can't mention all the names.
It's a tall list, and you've done justice to it. And for all the names that were not mentioned, this is the Gender Watch podcast saying kudos, Ayuko, for the hard work that you've done to ensure that Ghana gets an affirmative action and gender equity law. For yourself, Madam Sheila Menka Premo, we are very grateful that you have been very committed to this course, and for the education you've given us today on the podcast. We really appreciate it. So that is our conversation on the affirmative action and gender equity law, long walk to freedom. We've been speaking to Madam Sheila Menka Premo, the convener for the Affirmative Action Coalition. Well, the name will change very soon, and I'll be looking forward to that. But she's explained a lot about the law and what it portends for the Ghanaian woman. If you've been listening, remember to also share the good news about the affirmative action and gender equity law. We need it as a country. And so do your bit to ensure that people understand it. I'm Regina Boliboti. This has been the Gender Watch podcast, an initiative by the Aya Institute for Women, Politics and Media.